Hi, I'm Barbara Lucas, and welcome to the Green Room, where we explore the environmental topics that green up our world. We'll be discussing an international building rating system that's designed to encourage the use of green building methods and materials. It's called LEED, which stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, and it's a program of the U.S. Green Building Council, the USGBC. Our guest is John Beeson, an architect who currently works at the USGBC in Washington, D.C. as a LEED certification reviewer. Welcome to the show, John.
Hi, Barbara.
So tell us, why do we need LEED?
I think LEED is really about transforming the market. It's important to look at that context in terms of driving designers, engineers, and even product manufacturers to looking towards different ways of doing things. And that's where market transformation takes a key place in that role.
And why do we need green building?
I think green building has a lot to do with that market transformation. Again, we're not going to be able to get to the goals that we need to do for greenhouse gas emissions or resource using, all that sort of things that we do as humans on this planet until we look at green building as a way of progress steps towards getting where we need to go. And LEED is pretty much that way of getting there, progress steps. And that's, again, that context of market transformation.
And why are buildings so important? What is it? Why are we focused on that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Buildings account, when you look at all the energy uses in the U.S., it's really split up in three different ways: industry, transportation, and then the built environment. And so buildings account for over 40% of that energy use, whereas buildings alone also account for over 75% of the electrical energy use in the U.S. So they consume a tremendous amount of energy, and when we look at those fractions of the pie to tackle, buildings is something that we can pretty much manage pretty quickly if we wanted to.
Great. Well, it sounds like LEED is really important then. Is it catching on? Are there a lot of projects in the U.S. now?
Oh yes, absolutely. Just 2-3 years ago, we had maybe 3,000 certified projects. And in that short amount of time to now, 2012, we're over 10,000 commercial projects have been certified, where we have almost 20,000, over 20,000 homes that have been certified. So it is definitely taken a hold of the market. And we've seen drastic changes just in how products are being produced to address a lot of the aspects of the LEED rating system.
Great. Yeah, you were mentioning paints. The whole paint industry has changed.
Just a good snapshot of market transformation have just been paints over the last 10, 15 years. Whereas many years ago, people didn't know what VOCs were, volatile organic compounds, which exist in paints and products everywhere. And within that time period, there was a reference standard that was made, and LEED is really just a collection of reference standards. And there's a credit that you can get that identifies that reference standard and says, hey, if you use paints that have low or no VOC, you can get a credit. And because it referenced that standard out of California, now all these paints and all these manufacturers are changing the way that they make paints to address that reference standard.
That's great.
Yep. So
Big success.
Really quick changes in the market. And the carpet industry has been another fantastic one that has changed it.
Yeah, you see LEED certified, or LEED counts for LEED points. You see that on a lot of
you see that
things.
everywhere,
yeah.
Especially with the recycled content or regional materials. People 10, 15 years ago never thought of this stuff about where is my product being made and how is it being shipped to me and what is it made out of. And I think that consciousness is changing quickly, and that's where LEED is really helping with those baby steps.
How about in the local area? Are there projects around here?
Yeah, there are a slew of projects. Right now, there are currently 25 projects in the city of Ann Arbor that are registered, which is different than certification. That's when they actually go through the certification process. And there are about 11 projects in the city of Ann Arbor that have been certified. And that also includes the LEED for Homes standard, which there are about 7 LEED for Homes homes that have been certified.
Can you give me some examples of the different projects in town?
Sure. There's obviously the home side, which are pretty straightforward, but the other sides are commercial interiors to even new constructions, which are ranging from a courts and police building downtown, the municipal hall, to libraries, Mallett's Creek Library, to also just your basic office interiors, where somebody like the Ecology Center downtown has been doing a LEED commercial interiors rating system. And then it ranges to a slew of other different types of projects where there's a lot of flexibility in the LEED rating system for different types of projects to fall into different categories of rating system.
Great. Well, we have a video that we're going to show about a project here in town. It's a new home construction. Let's show that now. There are many different ways to achieve LEED Platinum certification, the highest level for any of the LEED rating systems. Here are some examples of points gained by category from a LEED Platinum house in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Points were given for being on an infill site with existing infrastructure and nearby resources and transit. The house, which is a duplex, also received credit for being compact development, 2 units on 1 city lot. As for the lot's landscaping, points were given for the use of drought-tolerant plants, minimal turf, and shaded hardscapes. Pervious pavers, rain gardens, and dry wells prevent stormwater runoff from the lot. Rainwater is harvested in a rain barrel, and plumbing fixtures such as low-flow toilets, faucets with aerators, and showers with separate temperature and flow dials are all EPA WaterSense certified to be efficient. Hot water goes from a super efficient gas heater through insulated pipes to one of the central manifold systems in each unit, sending water only where needed. The foundation is made of insulated concrete forms that keep basements dry and warm. As for the upper walls,
one of the ways that we found that it works really well to make a house use less energy is to build a thicker wall that can hold more insulation. But then we also wrap the wall with 2 inches of foam on the outside. We overlap the seams as well so that when air blows on the house, it effectively stops the air from moving through that framing or that building envelope. And so this is a wall here you're looking at that will be about R30, which is significantly more than most typical walls, which are about R13.
Super efficient windows further prevent heat transfer with the outdoors. Heating and cooling is provided by geothermal.
And this is a closed loop system, so that means the same fluid is circulating around the pipe, going about 200 feet down into the ground. We can use that steady energy of the earth to heat and cool our house, which is a very efficient way to do it. You hear about 95% efficient furnaces. Well, geothermal system is in the same measurement as 400 to 450 times efficient.
Electricity is conserved through the extensive use of day lighting, efficient bulbs, and localized control of fixtures for task lighting. Appliances are all ENERGY STAR rated, and the smallest necessary sizes were chosen. Blower door testing showed a HERS index of 42, indicative of an extremely efficient building envelope. To maintain the quality of the indoor air in such a tight house, a ventilation system was installed called an ERV, one for each unit.
Those work by 2 streams of air, fresh air from outside and stale air from inside, crossing paths in this enthalpy core, and they go through a series of channels where those air streams, while not physically touching, exchange energy with each other.
The wood flooring is reclaimed from deconstructed houses and has a natural oil finish, which is easy to repair. The linoleum is made from biomaterials. The use of lumber that is harvested regionally reduces transportation miles and their impact. Other reclaimed materials include pillars, tile, cabinets, tub, and interior windows. Countertops are of reclaimed bowling alleys or of laminated paper applied with non-toxic glue to plywood. Additionally, advanced framing uses less wood in the first place.
You can greatly reduce the amount of framing in a house, which has a good effect on saving resources. We'll use a wind bracing on the inside to make sure that we have a nice rigid structure, but the even better effect is that means that if you have 25% less wood in your exterior wall, that means you can have 25% more insulation.
The first floor of the home allows for aging in place with wheelchair-accessible doorways, a roll-in shower, and wall-mounted sink, lessening the need for an eventual change in habitation, reducing the homeowner's long-range environmental footprint. Okay, John, let's elaborate on a few of the things that we talked about briefly in the movie. For instance, the location. They talked about the infill, and what is the environmental benefit of filling in by putting the home in an existing area?
Using existing infrastructure accounts a lot for environmental attributes, and primarily those attributes occur in 2 different ways that I can think of right off the bat. And One of them has a lot to do with not having to dig all the infrastructure out in the middle of the site, the stormwater, the gas lines, the electrical lines. If those are already on site, you're not having to trench those far out in the way, or adding additional stormwater issues to neighborhood environments. Another aspect are the occupants of that building. The people in that building will tend to be within a certain radius and want to live within that certain radius. People that tend to live in a certain area tend to want to be able to commute easily to their job, get to their groceries, all the basic services around them they'll tend to use in that certain area. So it eliminates the use of the automobile.
I read on the LEED website they promoting smart transportation, so that would be not just public transportation but also pedestrian walking.
Yes, pedestrian walking and a lot of bicycling. We keep calling it alternative transportation. I'm pushing hard to change that term, thinking that the most basic form of transportation is walking and bicycling. It's not alternative.
Good point. And could infrastructure also count things like roads, schools?
Absolutely. Yeah, having all those basic services there makes a huge difference on not having to build it. The less you need to build, the less environmental impact you'll have. So using that existing infrastructure is key.
I noticed on the LEED website there's something called, they're giving certifications for whole neighborhood communities.
Yes, that's another rating system for neighborhood design, neighborhood development, I should say. And that looks a lot at how you can provide these linkages and all these basic services in a full design. It's fantastic that we have rating systems for individual buildings, but unless those buildings are actually connected to something, the occupants will tend to drive a lot or use more energy because of their driving or the way that they live.
And the sustainable site section, it talks about shading, the hardscapes. Why is shading important? And on the website it mentions the heat island effect. What's that?
Yep, so heat island effect is the effect that occurs over a time period of when the sun bakes a certain area. That area gets warm, and at night it's releasing that energy, but your concrete's going to get warm and it's going to take a long time to release that energy, especially if it's black, especially if you have a black roof. And all that heat is just kind of radiating out, and it changes the microclimate by raising the temperatures locally in a certain area. So by shading it, it prevents a lot of that sunlight from getting in and hitting it and heating it up over a period of time. So that's one aspect of sustainable sites that deals with urban heat island effect, both roof and non-roof materials. But it also stems into how stormwater management is handled.
Is there a trade-off when you have a shaded hardscape in terms of not being able to do solar?
Absolutely. There's always a trade-off, and that's why LEED has that flexibility to look at the design based on your scenario and your selection. What's the most important thing to a developer and to a homeowner when they're designing their house? Do they want a lot of sunlight, or would they rather have access to solar or prevent it, or have lots of shading instead of lots of access to solar?
And you mentioned before the possibility of using shrubs to shade your hardscapes so that you wouldn't preclude the solar.
Yes, you can look at shrubs. There's tons of different techniques, and that's where LEED really follows. Again, it's a collection of reference guides, and with a collection of reference standards, it also has a collection of resources. And so you look through the reference guide, and it'll give you tons of ideas on what else you can do, be it shrubs to help shade portions of that hardscape, to even larger ideas of how to mount photovoltaics in a certain way to accomplish renewable energy targets.
And the stormwater section, you said something before the show that I really liked. You said they ought to change the phrase to horizontal rainwater.
Yes.
And why do you say that?
Well, because somehow engineers got this mindset that once the drop of rain landed on the roof and started flowing horizontally, we had to get it away from that building as quickly as possible. And we developed large culverts, large pipes to get it away as quickly as possible. When we're realizing now that that puts a huge stress and strain on local streams and rivers, and it takes away a very valuable resource, water, and just shoves it downriver and makes it really difficult for people to access, and flushes away all the pollutants with it. So we're finding that by changing the way that we think about certain aspects of environmental design, we can change the way that we think of that resource. So thinking of rain or stormwater as horizontal rain is, I think, a different way of thinking.
It's interesting, it's like you're changing the mindset instead of changing the structure. I mean, doing both, but the mindset's as important.
Yeah, mindset's a really big deal in green building. I think many people get terrified of green building right off the bat just because it's a very different way of thinking. It's neither good nor bad, it's just a different way of thinking. And it opens up a perspective of making sure that you look at things in a different way. And I think that's helpful for looking at the struggles that we have to deal with in the next 50 to 100 years on this planet.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the energy and atmosphere section, it talks about daylighting, and that's another time I wonder about the trade-offs, because if you have, well, daylighting is obviously important so that you don't flip a switch every time you walk into a room, but I do know that glass has got a really low R value. You mentioned 1 or something like that, and compared to a wall, which can be really high R value. So aren't you losing by having big windows?
So there's definitively a trade-off between how many windows you have and how much insulation you have in your walls. Now, daylighting actually falls into the IEQ category, indoor environmental quality, and that's a different category within LEED. Okay. Energy and atmosphere is certainly a playback with that, because how many windows you have will certainly dictate the energy performance of that building. Mm-hmm. What changes is the orientation of those windows. So if you have a lot more windows on the south face of a house, particularly in Michigan, you'll want to spend, if you want windows in your house and have daylighting, you want to make sure that those windows are addressing how they capture the sunlight. And they can capture the sunlight for 2 different reasons. One is for direct heat gain, which helps a lot in Michigan for the majority of the year, not this hot summer, but for the majority of the year. And then the other aspect is definitively daylighting and bringing in the natural light so you don't have to turn on those light switches.
Mm-hmm. And there are decent windows you can buy these days. Although you did mention, again before the show, that we have to watch out with assuming that windows need to be replaced when actually it's caulking around the window that might be more important.
The biggest thing, the misconception on windows is that you move into an old house and you look at the windows and you're like, these are worthless. And the majority of the time, they're pretty good. They've lasted 100 years already. They're going to last a long time in the future if you really just take care of them in a different way. And I've always pointed out to people that a piece of glass is an R value of almost 1, about 1. And it's not going to change. What changes, though, is how you address how the air gets around it. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes a really big difference on windows.
Another trade-off that that home in that video illustrated was the wood stove, because it had it adds the ability to burn renewable materials, but it takes away from the thermal envelope. It breaks the thermal envelope.
Yep, it's effectively making puncture holes in the thermal envelope. And in that video, the home actually brings in outdoor air and combusts the outdoor air and then shoves it out the chimney. Whereas many homes still have chimneys that are burning, especially in their furnace or their hot water heater, they're burning conditioned air that's already inside the house that they've spent a lot of energy heating and cooling or changing the humidity to the perfect thing. They're burning that interior air and then shoving that out the chimney. So that it does, having small punctures in a building envelope will certainly decrease its overall energy efficiency, but even worse is having the internal combustion of internal air and shoving that out the chimney. That'll create even a larger energy disparity.
But if you do it right and you use the EPA rated stoves and
you're making improvements, absolutely. Yeah. And there's a lot of benefits that aren't directly related to efficiency and green building associated with having those stoves. I mean, there's a huge quality of life in the living room alone. To have all that radiant heat makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. And less dependence on fossil fuels on the grid. Controllability was mentioned in the video. I believe that's something that LEED really likes.
Oh yeah, LEED really likes it. The difficult part of LEED is that it's flexible, so it also provides a lot of gray area on how to do that. But it really does like it, and it rewards a lot of controllability. The difficulty comes in as to how do you demonstrate controllability. You know, it's more than just having a infrared occupancy sensor. It's got to be more than that, and it's got to demonstrate control for the occupants, both in a shared conference space. You know, if you can pull the shades down and have light switches with different lighting controls, that shows control. But the LEED rating system looks at different options for project teams to devise their own ways of doing it.
I thought controllability was stuff like having zone heating so that you could have one part of the house be warm and that you're using and the other part not, or having, like the movie shows, a switch over a task area instead of having to illuminate the entire room.
Yeah, and that's all part of it as well. It's just different credits and different considerations.
Let's talk about the materials and resources. Now, one of the pet peeves of mine is that mantra, reduce, reuse, recycle. A lot of people zero in on the recycle section when they're going out to buy something for their house, whether they're remodeling or building new, looking for a product with recycled material, but maybe they should be actually thinking about how to reduce the materials they use in the house, or the new materials that they use in the first place. So let's talk about that whole concept. And the first one, how about the advanced framing? That was talked about in the video, and I am not very familiar with that. Can you kind of explain that?
Yeah, sure. So advanced framing just looks at ways of lining up and laying out the stud framework so that it uses less studs in the first place and accomplishes the same task. It still has the same structural loading, same properties based on what it needs to hold in terms of floor loads and snow loads and structural loads, but it's framed out so it's spaced differently. There's also resource efficiency in terms of how you lay out your studs. So designers can look at a building and say, okay, well, if you're laying out a stud every 24 inches on center, well, let's make sure that the house stops within a 24-inch increment rather than making it an awkward increment, because then you're just using more studs as a result. So there's resource efficiency associated with advanced framing techniques, but there's also just using less materials.
It sounds so like a no-brainer. Why aren't we doing it more?
Planning. It's hard for humans in general to plan ahead. And so a lot of it just has to do with thinking and planning ahead.
Another area that I wondered about whether LEED gives points for is flexibility, because well, I got started thinking about this when I was watching the Home and Garden channel, where they kept showing these remodels of homes where they rip out the kitchen, constantly ripping out kitchens. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, all the materials, because people change their taste about kitchens like every 5 or 10 years. Does LEED give points for having designs that will prevent such enormously material consumptive remodelings?
Well, I can't say that they specifically address it. There might be some caveats in some of the other rating systems that I'm not specifically privy to or understand really well. But there are pilot credits associated with looking at adaptive planning on buildings, making sure that a building that is once established as a health services provider can quickly change over to another function within that same health service provider.
That'd be handy, because I know hospitals are constantly changing their needs as technology changes or populations change their needs.
Yeah. But the use of, like those TV shows you had highlighted, the one thing that they love to do is throw clips into there about the celebrating of demolishing something and throwing all that stuff in the garbage. And that's something that I think LEED is really trying to look at, as how can we curtail that. That's a portion of the rating system that is certainly struggling about how to reuse materials and use salvaged materials.
That goes on both ends. One end is that as the remodel is happening, LEED wants you to recycle all the materials that are being thrown away, but also you get a lot of points if you use salvaged materials.
Yep. And it falls under the same credit categories. So if you salvage something, you can credit it as it being diverted from waste. That's the same credit. And then it can still go to another credit to count for being a salvaged material reused. And those are things that we call synergies, where there's lots of synergies across credits, where if you just pre-plan and think about these things cross over really quickly and the points add up fast.
And you and your house have some salvage materials. Tell us about those.
Yes, my house is a 1917 home that we did a lot of refurbishing work and reused all the siding on, as well as all the trim work. We put an addition on the house using a lot of earth plasters, but all the door casing and wall casing I salvaged from a house that was just tearing it all out. And I took all the wood and scraped it down, and it looks beautiful. It's beautiful wood. Same with the architecture school. They were getting rid of a lot of tabletops, and I figured I could use those for something.
Great, great. So you mentioned that the market development hasn't taken hold for salvaged materials as much as you would have liked to have seen. Do you
Yes.
think that there's anything that can be done about that? Or
I think there probably could be lots of things done. How to find one thing that say this would be a magic bullet, I don't think there'll be a magic bullet. I think it's a collection of things. You know, like if Home Depot suddenly said, we're going to start stocking all salvage studs, I think that would drastically change the market.
Yeah,
just like they did for FSC wood. If they did something that drastic, it probably would change things. And there's enough, well, a lot of people would argue there's probably not enough wood to manage that market. But from what I've seen, there's a lot of salvage materials out there. We're just not trying to capture it.
Mm-hmm. Ease of availability,
Yeah.
so the consumer can find it quick and get it when they need it.
Yeah. And most people think of salvage materials as those dumpster divers. And in reality, that's probably true. I mean, it's really hard to get salvage materials unless you know people who know people. And the connections of those people are you know, probably the same kind of network of groups. Mm-hmm. So unless you're in those networks of groups, it's hard to get that going.
Well, there's things like the Habitat for Humanity Restore that, I mean, anybody can go to those.
Yeah,
and
those are a fantastic resource. Same with Recycle Ann Arbor.
Yeah, right. Okay, so let's talk about some benefits to LEED. And we've already talked about environmental, but how about some human health benefits?
Yeah, the direct human health benefits have a lot to do with, well, there's the global scale and then there's the micro scale. So on the micro scale, within the building itself, there's a lot of benefits to green building and LEED in terms of the actual occupants. So an occupant in an office building that has zero daylight, no controllability, they're just going to be grumpy. You know, in general, they're just not going to be as happy to working there. But studies have always shown that if people have daylight, they have access to control and control their environment, be it an operable window or the light switch where they need it, they're just going to be happier overall, which means that they're going to not be as sick as often. They're going to be retained as an employee, which changes a lot.
Financial benefits. We don't have a lot of time left, but I'd like to get to that.
Yeah, the primary financial benefits have a lot to do with energy consumption. There are lots of other financial benefits. For instance, I can highlight that 1% efficiency and increased productivity of your employees will make a huge difference on a business anywhere. And that's something that most building owners don't look at, or even tenants. They don't look at that. But there's obviously energy efficiency that can help save money just by reducing. You know, you reduce how much energy you use, that's less money going to the utility.
It sounds like people are wanting to have their home certified as LEED so they can sell it better, so they can, if they are a landlord, so they can rent it better, so that they can get higher rates for it. So apparently it's been proven to help that way?
It certainly helps, and I would say that the real estate market is still adjusting and trying to figure out how green building can actually come to play with the big guns, so to speak, with understanding why a house has more value because of its greenness to it. And it's taken hold on the commercial side of things much faster than it is on the residential.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really interesting.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Okay. You'll find links relevant to the show at ewashington.org/greenroom. See you next month in the green room.